things that's happening right now in the NFL for all the reasons that you said. My concerns with Najee are that his efficiency numbers are just bad. Like last year, they just were. Like you pull up advanced metrics and you look at people who are like rushing yards over expectation, right? Which is something that's supposed to factor in the entire circumstance. It's supposed to factor in the circumstances when the ball carrier gets the ball, rate of speed when the ball carrier gets the ball, where the blockers are, like what the situation is, and it's supposed to factor in how many yards you should get under these circumstances, and then the expectation is set, and then what you do. And his rushing yards over expectation were very low, like among some of the worst running backs in the NFL. And, average yards per carry also low, like the efficiency numbers weren't there. And I understand that there's that's one of those hard situations where you could look at like O-line, you could look at offensive scheme, you could look at all of these things and say, like, I don't know how much is on the running back and how much is on the set of circumstances around him. And I think that's hard. This is one of the things. There are so many, and I'm all over the place here, but there are so many different places, I think, in today's NFL content space that are exciting about people who are experts in various and very small things in the NFL that you can go to, like Matt Harmon from Reception Perception, who's charting all of the wide receivers and telling you, who's good versus man and who's good versus press and who's good versus zone and what routes they're good on and who's actually good, whether they're getting the ball and putting up numbers or not. The one thing I'm looking for is somebody who will do that at the running back position, because I think it's a really tough position to read, but like a rushing yards over expectation stat is supposed to factor all of those things in. I don't know how they put it together, but it's supposed to, and his numbers are not good. So I have slight concerns about Najee Harris, coupled with all of the Jaylen Warren stuff that we heard a little bit last year. We're hearing a little bit now. Like, is he going to be a factor in this offense, or is it going to be less of a bell cow situation and more of like a committee? Jaylen comes onto the field in certain situations and takes Najee off of it. I don't know. I think that Najee is in a position where he needs to get those numbers up this year, or find somebody to start, advocating for him about why those numbers aren't actually telling a story about a running back who is more highly thought of than his play would indicate,
Right. And the offensive line, the conversation around the O-line is that they're getting better. And they have a mobile quarterback now, because all of the offensive line at the time of the draft was coming off of an aging quarterback who couldn't move as well. The offensive line wasn't good. There were really no all-pros there. But to be fair to what you're saying, the Steelers knew all of that when they drafted a running back. So they drafted a running back arguably in a position where he wasn't going to be able to succeed unless he really was the best in the game. And maybe Najee was maybe was a bit overrated at the time coming out of Bama, because he's running in front of the best offensive line in college football. It's a little different. And even talking to him at camp his rookie year, he was talking about how, I don't care what the offensive line is like, I'm going to run through it. I can run through a brick wall. And we're all sitting there thinking, this is not a good mentality for a position that has a 4 or 5 year shelf life with an offensive line that is not good right now. You're not going to have a long career, bro. So he seemingly has adjusted a little bit, but he's also not been fully healthy. And I think especially if Kenny Pickett picks it up and becomes at least better than he was last year and becomes a legit franchise QB, then all the eyeballs would go right to Najee if that team struggles offensively in some way.
Totally. And then the problem at the running back position too is that you've got these guys in the first round where the expectations are very high. And then this is a position where it just is. You can pluck somebody that goes undrafted and put them in there and watch them have some degree of success. And there's a laundry list of examples there. I mean, you just have to go back as far as Tyler Algier last season. And I know that he wasn't one of those guys who was flashy or sexy or anything like that. And you could look at the Falcons and Tyler Algier's numbers and say, oh, he's propped up by volume because all they do there is run for some inexplicable reason when they have those passing game assets. But anyway, but Tyler Algier in all the advanced metrics, like if you go looking for it, you're like, no, it's not volume based. It's all, every time he gets a shot, like he's overreaching expectations. His rushing yards over expectation per attempt is at the top of the NFL with names that you would expect to be there, like Nick Chubb and Tony Pollard and And then there's Tyler Algier. Like there are guys who work their way into that conversation who seem to come out of nowhere. And to me, that drives the price of the running backs down because this almost feels like a bites at the apple type of situation.
Yeah.
Clearly, there are some guys whose skill set is a little bit more varied or extreme or versatile or something like that. You've got a Bijan Robinson and a Jahmyr Gibbs, and I'm really eager to see what they're able to do.
I thought it was kind of odd and curious, not to say he's not great. I cover the Big 12. I've seen him in person.
Yep.
But to get drafted in the first round in the midst of this conversation was almost like that's the opposite of what everyone else is saying you should do. You're still doing it. So he does have pressure right away to perform, but that was interesting. But a lot of it also is how the team is built. Like, I think part of this, and it's not happened yet, and I'm not necessarily telling the man how he should run his business, but in order for the running back position to ever maybe really fight this fight, Derrick Henry or somebody at that level is going to have to legit sit out games, like legit be willing to screw a
Le'Veon
team
did
almost.
Le'Veon did that at the height of his, and then it didn't go anywhere and didn't do anything, and the only person it hurt was Le'Veon.
That's true. Yeah, but like Saquon put his tail between his legs and agreed, because the issue is, even though all these incentives exist in these deals, and you hear all the time that, okay, Jonathan Taylor, he got to get tons of incentives and then he'll really show them. If it's a 1-year deal or a franchise tag with tons of incentives, you're not showing anybody anything. Like, teams are willing to pay for production for a year. They just don't want to lock into a 4-year deal with a running back. Clearly.
And the numbers show that there are a lot more reasons that they shouldn't than that they should.
Right. It's a business. You name me 4 that I got better after 30 years old. It's like Adrian Peterson, and that's it.
Exactly. That's the problem.
On my last show, actually, I talked with Amon Green, and he feels that if the Packers would have kept him, he would have been able to put up those numbers, and he would have been able to show you and all. But it's like, he didn't in Houston, and Adrian Peterson just such a high bar. The Packers won a championship the year after saying, we're done with you, Amon Green. So like, that example doesn't show. And really, if the last time an elite running back for me off the top of my head was on a Super Bowl team as one of the top 2 best players in that roster, probably Marshawn Lynch with Seattle. Like, that's probably how long ago it was. Every other year after that's it's been a series of running backs. You have the Rams. They go with Todd Gurley. He wants more money. They say, we don't really want to do it. They end up CJ Anderson off his couch, enough yards with everything else working, and they go ahead and win the Super Bowl. Like, that's not good for the position trying to argue for more money or longer term deals, I think, is the issue, or even guaranteed money, of course, that every player wants. That was Le'Veon Bell's whole thing. And he's come out and says he regrets, because the Steelers deal, actually, you could argue at the time, if he would have taken that, probably would have hurt the Steelers. Like, they're probably better off he didn't do it, because they were offering him a decent amount that he wanted more still.
Yeah. The running back situation is tricky, because I think we all want people to be treated the way that we would want to be treated. And in these situations, if we were all running backs and we were at the top of our field, and they're like, sorry, like, we're just not going to pay you. Like, you still have value to us. It's just, we don't have to pay you. And they don't have to. They really don't. The way that the system is structured, and you asked about answers and like what they should do to change. I don't know those answers right now. I just don't know. I don't know that there's a clear-cut path forward for how to fix this for the running backs. But I mean, if I was a team and I was a general manager, I can't tell you that I wouldn't do exactly what they're doing, because they have the right to tag the player, and then they have the right to tag them again. And then the third time, maybe it doesn't become a smart financial move. And so maybe you don't, but like, if it's built into the system that you can, and everything tells you that the examples of teams that have success and make it to the end of the postseason, they don't have these star running backs. So it doesn't actually matter for your build in terms of where you're prioritizing money, but also all of the numbers show that after a certain number of years, they're going to go like this, and actually probably closer to like that quickly, that there's going to be a drop off. Even if you're a super high end running back, it's going to go over a cliff. Then you don't want to be stuck holding the bag when it goes over the cliff. So I think this is the way that they're going to keep doing it. I don't think it's a bad way. It sucks for the people.
And in business, what's the motivation to go all of a sudden be the GM or owner to like fight the good fight and just throw cash at a running back when no one else is doing it, everyone else is having success not doing it.
Right.
You're, like, there's no motivation to be that guy and be that crusader. Really, it's going to again have to be a running back that somehow sets this. But I guess then I'll ask you, is maybe a better way of asking the question on where this goes from here. Do you think, number one, the NFL should or needs to care about this at all? Because they do normally sometimes care about PR, and these are star players that are very now vocal, feeling like they're being treated unfairly, whether it be fantasy, which is now obviously a big deal for the NFL, and money going around and betting, and even these players and these teams. And there are some teams that are built where the running back's the MVP. The Giants with Saquon, obviously Derrick Henry and the Titans are another example. So it's out there. So should the NFL care? Do you think they care? And then does this in any way lead us down a path that maybe the NFL structure and model needs investigated? Because in comparison to the other major sports leagues, even though the hard cap has created parity, these franchise tags, you could argue, are unfair across the board to players separate from even running back. Like Travis Kelce, for example, best tight end, but his numbers also say he's a top 5 receiver in the game, if not top 3.
Right.
But the franchise tag is going to max him out at a certain level for tight ends when he's going to say, I'm not only am I better than all these guys, I'm also better than receivers who you have a higher cap for. So is this going to send us down a path that, like, Travis Kelce, if he's ever franchise tagged, which probably won't happen, could maybe force the NFL to do something different? Or is it just going to be a life that's unfair to running backs? Because that could be the situation too. The running back used to be a major position in the league. That kind of went away. But
it could cycle back, because there are some things
back,
like the NFL does go in cycles. You're always looking for a way to how are the other teams built? If you're a team like the Falcons, I think are a perfect example of this to a degree. You look at your roster and say, okay, where do we have an advantage? Like, what are we better at? Well, we're not at quarterback, right? Like for the last few years, they just haven't, that's not the way that they're built. So how can we create an advantage? Let's look at the defenses that we're facing. What are they good at? And one of the things that is clear in the last few years from a defensive standpoint is that rosters have started to be built differently. You don't have those big space eaters in the middle the way that you used to on the defensive line. Like we've seen the bodies change up front. And that is because they're built to stop the pass. If you stop the quarterback, then you stop everything. So they're all slimmer so that they can go rush the quarterback.
Look at Aaron Donald, arguably the best ever. Very small in comparison to back in the day. Yeah.
But you don't have those run stuffers that we once did. So if you're a team like the Falcons and you look at your roster and you say, we are undermanned comparatively, well, then strategically, the smart thing to do is to say, what are they good at? So what are they less good at? Let's attack that. And so to a degree, you could look at them and say, like, there's a strong argument to be made for it being smart for that specific roster to run the ball as frequently as they did, because the defenses aren't as built to stop it. So now you're just minimizing the ways in which the other team has an advantage over you. So I think that if enough teams started building their roster to attack that, then you'd start seeing defenses built there. Like in those ways, I think roster building can become cyclical. I think now that analytics is a part of the game, I find it hard to believe that running backs will ever go back to being as valued as they once were, just because of the law of averages and efficiency. You know, like it's obvious that if you take 3 shots downfield and one of them hits, you know, that you've just moved the ball a lot farther than you probably would have even with 3 successful runs. They gain 4 yards, you know, like
if you gain, 6 yards on a series thanks to 2 running backs, that's still 6 yards, whether it be off of 2 running backs getting paid a lot less or one man getting the bag. Like you don't need to give one man the bag to get the production that 2 other guys who are getting league minimum could potentially give you. That's kind of the issue they're in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. That's for sure. I did talk to Terrell Davis earlier this week. We did an event together. And one of the things that he brought up that I thought was worthwhile putting in the back of our minds, but this only applies to certain teams, I think, is that he said, so he was a guy who was an undrafted rookie, came into camp as like 7th on the depth chart. He said, I don't know if that's actually true. 7 running backs. Anyway, he said it was he's last on the list. And then he works his way into the starting job, to start the season, which is just a bonkers ascent. Yeah. So he does that, plays that year as a rookie. He's good. Mike Shanahan ripped up his contract. And he said he didn't have to rip up my contract. He could have just said, I have you under contract and you're going to play. And that's maybe even a smart business decision. And if
in this day and age, it wouldn't get ripped up. I think that's right.
That's what I said. That's what I said to him too. I'm like, they wouldn't have done that now.